Hi guys, and welcome back again. So we're going to start looking at the oscillators next. So as I said, we have 4 identical oscillators. We can switch between them by clicking on these buttons here. Now if I change, say, some of the parameters here, if I was to copy this oscillator and paste it, you'll see we have the same settings for oscillator 2. So that's quite handy if you just want to make a minor adjustment to one of the oscillators but have the same start point. Let's just reinitialize now. Now, as we already mentioned, we can mix in the level of our respective oscillators using these knobs here. So for example, with these 2 identical oscillators, let's tune down an octave the second oscillator and bring it in. So you can hear there, we can use that level there to mix in the respective levels of the different oscillators. Okay, so back to oscillator 1. So let's have a look at the parameters on this oscillator module. So first of all, we can choose the oscillator type by selecting it from this menu here. Now we're going to go through these different oscillator types, but we'll start off with classic. In classic, we're going to have a square and a sawtooth wave. Let's start off by looking at some of the parameters that are going to be common for all the oscillator types. First of all, we have this note value here. Now this allows you to tune the oscillator in semitones. Double click to reset. So say if we were using multiple oscillators, we could create chords here. So let's say we wanted to create a minor chord. So 3 semitones and 7 semitones. So that's quite nice to create kind of chordal effects with one finger on the keyboard. It gives you kind of very ravey kind of sounds. Because actually you're just pushing a minor chord up and down the keyboard, which is in some ways kind of quite unmusical, but it gives you that kind of old school, kind of lo-fi ravey kind of sound. Let's reinitialize that. So we can do some interesting things in terms of tuning. We can also do some kind of more standard things like the example I gave earlier on where I tuned one of the oscillators an octave lower. If you had a sound that was a bit thin, that's a great way of adding in a little bit of fatness. And that can actually depend on the key you're writing in as well. So if you were trying to create a low bass sound, and sometimes if you're playing it in the lower octave, it sounds too low and it's not coming through enough, but higher up, it sounds a little bit thin. You can kind of blend between the two. So you have a little bit of that too low lower octave alongside the kind of higher octave, and you can get away with it a little bit more. So it's quite a useful feature being able to tune oscillators separately. So then, as we've already established, we have an octave control here. And then we have a fine tune as well. And this allows you to tune the oscillators in sense. So let's bring in a second oscillator. So by creating a little bit of detuning between the 2 oscillators, we create that kind of thicker chorus style sound. So you can hear the difference there. So fine tuning can be quite useful as well. So then we have 2 knobs here, Control A and Control B. Now these are going to differ depending on the oscillator mode that we have. So we're going to revisit these when we have a look at the different oscillator modes in a minute. So next up, we can actually change the phase of the oscillator. So between 0 and 29, it's going to be free running. You can see our display here. So you see, if you watch when we get to 30, we'll get an orange line that will appear on the display. There it is. This now means we can change the phase of the oscillator. So it can either be free running or locked to a certain position within its phase. And then we have this wavetable mix dial here. So this basically allows you to blend your oscillator signal with any of 49 available waveforms. So in this case, we've got a sine wave. So we're blending between a sine wave and a sawtooth wave. So it gives you kind of wavetable functionality within Spire. Okay, so that's kind of the main parameters that are going to remain the same for all of the oscillators. Let's dive in and have a look at the classic mode in a bit more detail. So as I said, you can crossfade between a square and a sawtooth wave in classic mode, but so far all we've seen is crossfading between a sine and a saw wave. And the reason for that is that in the classic mode, Control A is going to be responsible for crossfading between that square and saw wave. So at the moment you can see we have a sawtooth wave. We can now see the shape changing within this display here, and we can hear that now we have a square wave. Saw square. So if we wanted to then mix between the sine and the square, we could use the wavetable mix dial to do so. Now, when we're in square wave, Control B is now going to be a pulse width modulation dial. So if we're in the saw position here, this is now redundant. But as I said, in square mode, we go from a kind of inaudible signal to then changing the width of that square wave. Now let's just quickly route an LFO to affect this so you can hear this at work. So we go oscillator 1, Control B. You get that trademark kind of quite ominous sounding bass sound you get with pulse width modulation. So that was just routing an LFO to affect Control B. We're going to go through modulation later, but just to kind of show you what that's for really, because just statically, it doesn't really do a huge amount. I'll just reset the sound then. But it's when it moves, we get that kind of interest to the sound. And that is the classic mode. So square and sawtooth wave. So let's have a look at the next one, which is noise. Now in the noise mode, as you'd probably expect, we're going to get a noise signal. So now the note function is not going to do anything because noise is all frequencies at equal level. So it doesn't actually really have a pitch to it. We can octave it up and down though. There's kind of frequency shifting it. Now, in this case, you can see what it's doing here. Control A is going to have a low pass filter or a high pass filter. So the first half of this knob is low pass, and as soon as we exceed that, it's high pass. And then Control B is determining the peak of this. Now, what's also interesting here is when we have key enabled here, what's going to happen is the filter is actually going to move according to the key we press, essentially. So as I octave up, the filter position is changing. Let's take key off. Now, as I'm playing, let me just bring my display up here so we can see the note I'm playing. So C5, C4, C3, C2, and so on and so forth. That's not actually changing the sound at all, but bring key back in. So we can actually kind of play that noise up and down the keyboard. And that is the noise mode for the oscillator. Remember, of course, we can use this to crossfade again. Between, in this case, a sine wave and the noise. Okay, so that's going to be part one of our look at the oscillators. So let's just do a little recap. So first of all, we discussed our 4 oscillator buttons and our 4 oscillator levels here, so we can mix in the respective levels of the oscillators. We talked about the fact note allows us to pitch the oscillators, fine tune allows us to kind of tune the oscillators and sense, so we can get that detuning, and octave allows us to octave up and down. And I gave you some examples of kind of tuning 3 oscillators to play a chord, and using the octave control to thicken out an oscillator, a single oscillator. Now, we talked about the fact Control A and Control B will change depending on the oscillator mode that's selected. Phase allows us to set the phase of the oscillator, so it can either be free running from 0 to 29, and then 30 plus, the oscillator is going to have its phase locked to different positions within its cycle. And then wavetable mix is going to allow you to mix between 49 waveforms that you can choose from this menu here, and use the wavetable mix to move between them. Now in classic mode, Control A is going to blend between a square wave and a sawtooth wave, and Control B is going to change the width of that square wave, and we did a little modulation example using an LFO. And then we had a look at the noise here. Now in this case, the note's not going to do anything and the fine tune is not going to do anything. We have Control A determining whether we have a low pass or a high pass filter, just 2 positions. First half of the knob is going to be low pass, second half high pass. Control B gives you the peak level. And when we have key mode initialized here, we can actually move that filter up and down as we play higher or lower up the keyboard, which kind of gives the noise a pitch essentially. Okay, so as I said, that's going to be part 1. In the next video, we're going to head across and have a look at the FM mode and the AM sync mode. So I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.